friends, family, strangers who decided to watch this video for pretty much no reason, but thanks anyways. For the past 6 months, or the first 6 months of 2023, I have been documenting in my notes section of my phone every book that I have read. I guess in order, but it doesn't really matter in what order I read them. I like to think I read a good bit. Of course I could have read more, but you know, when I was in school until I have a job and life just happens. I have nothing else to say, so I'm just gonna get into the books that I read. So I read a decent number of Colleen Hoover books so far this year because I want to say I started reading them this year because I got some books for Christmas. I'd heard about her books and like a good few of them had a lot of people liked them on TikTok and just in general. So I figured I would grab a few, start reading, and I personally love every single one of her books. I have some favorites. I wouldn't say there's any that I hate so far, but some rank higher than others. These are the first, oh god, why am I looking off? These are the first 4 Colleen Hoover books that I read. The first one that I started with was All Your Perfects. It's not a bad book. It's actually really good. Very simple. My sister told me about this book. She told me to read it. I don't remember if I was gifted this or if I went and bought it, but basically there are 2 timelines that the book takes place in. Then and now. And then is when our 2 main characters, Quinn and Graham, first meet, and then now is when their marriage is falling apart. And that's basically the entire book, is how they met, why is their marriage falling apart, how do they fix it. Again, not my favorite, but again, not a bad book. 1, and that's all I'm gonna tell you. I'd give it like 3 stars out of 5. Again, not a bad book, but definitely not my favorite that she's written. Next is Reminders of Him. Basically, the book is about this woman who just got released from prison, who is going to this town where her daughter lives to try and get her daughter back. It's been 5 years since she was born. A tragedy has happened, and it's the reason why she was in prison. And she basically has to fight against everybody in this town and everybody that was once in her life to try and get her daughter back. And she falls in love in the process with the one person who could get her back into her daughter's life. And that's basically the book. I'd probably rate this one a 3 out of 5 stars as well because it was good. Not in my top 5. Moving on! I'm gonna go to this one next. And when I tell you this is definitely my 3rd favorite book of Colleen Hoover's that I've read so far, and I don't think that spot will get pushed back anymore because I think I've read her best. So next is November 9th. And yes, in fact, the male character in this book is kind of something, but don't even keep that in mind when you read this book because I love this book and there's no shortage of twists and turns and cliffhangers and new information, and you are constantly on the edge of your seat. Things are always happening and there's literally no getting comfortable. I personally really like this book. I really like the storyline. This book is about 2 characters, Fallon and Ben, who meet on November 9th one year. From then on, decide to only meet on November 9th every single year. They don't meet on other days. They only stay in contact on that day. They don't have each other's phone numbers, they don't have emails, there's literally no way to contact each other except to go back to the diner that they first met at. Every single year, something new comes up. Something new happens. I love the way this book is written. On the first page, there's 1st November 9th, and it goes like that. There's like 2nd November 9th, 3rd November 9th. The book is only taking place on the November 9th. You get to hear about what happens in between the years. The writing only takes place on the day that they're supposed to meet. There's so much more I could give you on this book, but you'd have to read it to really understand it and to really experience it. This is definitely worth the read in my opinion. I'd put it 4.5 out of 5 stars, just because I'm very stingy with 5 out of 5 stars. Check this one out. Definitely recommend. My mom loved it. I'm gonna give it to my sister to borrow because she needs to read it. It's a necessity in a book reading life like mine. Last of the 4 first Colleen Hoover books that I read is this one, and this book holds the #1 spot in all of Colleen Hoover books, and that spot will never go to anybody else. We have Verity. I didn't want to read this book for the longest time because I was scared that I would not like any of her other books. compared to this book because it had such a hype. Everybody who read this book loved this book. I do have the extended edition hardcover. I prefer the book without the extra chapter. And I can't tell you why without spoiling the book, but I personally don't think it was necessary. For me, there are 3 main characters: Lowen, Jeremy, and Verity. Jeremy and Verity are married. Verity is in like this coma, and she was a famous writer. And Lowen, I believe, is trying to make money, so Jeremy is looking for someone to like finish the book series that Verity was writing, and so he hired her to come like live in their house and get a feel for how Verity wrote the other books and like how to finish up that book and like stuff like that. While she's there, she finds a manuscript written by Verity that like details Verity's real life over the course of many years. And that's what the book is, and I'm not going to say anything else about it, and I'm not going to read any of my favorite quotes from this book because you have to read it. Number 1 favorite book by her. This was so terrifying at points. If there's any book that you take away from this video that you want to read this one. 5 out of 5 stars. And that's all. Alright, so next up on the list, the entire Twilight series. I don't care what anyone says. I love the Twilight movies. They are definitely cringy, but I love the Twilight movies. I bought these books separately, clearly, since the spines don't match. These 2 came from Amazon. That's why they look like this. One of my coworkers is also a reader, and she had read the Twilight books. And she told me that they were really good, and they were like so much more detailed than the movies, and like everything was just 1,000 times better. And I love the movies, so I was like, I feel like I'm gonna love the books. So I went and I bought the books. When I tell you, I flew through these 4 humongous books. Like, these are probably the biggest books I own. The first Twilight book, it's a lot more detailed. Things happen in the book different from what they happen in the movie. I prefer the books. They're so much more detailed. There's so much more happening. I do think there was a good bit that could have been left out. Like, there are certain scenes in the book that are like way more than what necessary. That's the only downside to the books. Amazing books though. I read, in order, the first Twilight, New Moon. I bought these 2 books at the same time. First, once I finished the first Twilight book, I had decided I needed to immediately order the last 2 books because I was just going through them. Like, I was just gonna straight shoot through the 4 books. Again, with Eclipse. As the books go on, they get thicker. I always have a hard time remembering which one's New Moon and which one's Eclipse. This was the newborn army. Eclipse was the newborn army. And New Moon was when Edward left and Bella and Jacob got really close. And the whole wolf thing came into play. And on to my favorite book of the series. For good reason, I think. Is Breaking Dawn. The thickest of the 4 books. It's actually done in 3 parts. This is my all-time favorite though. It's so much more detailed, it's so much better than the movie. And those are my 2 favorite movies of the Twilight saga, is Breaking Dawn Part 1 and Breaking Dawn Part 2. And then a month or 2 ago that I picked up Midnight Sun. I do own the whole Twilight saga, the original and then the White collection. I own both. So I have all of them, but I read the first 4, and then I had this one, and Life and Death, and The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner. I hit a stump in my reading. Like, I couldn't get really back into it. So I picked up this one, and it's what got me back into it. And this, if you didn't know, is the first Twilight book / movie, but told from Edward's point of view. And after reading this book, I strongly think that there should be an entire series of every single book but told from Edward's point of view. This is really cool because you actually get like a better sense of what was going through his head throughout the first book and movie. So like when I watched the movies before I ever read the books, there were some things that didn't make sense to me. This helped me to understand so much. Like what he was thinking while they were in the classroom, what he was thinking when they first met, like what he was thinking the entire time, how his family reacted, like everything like that. This book details so well, and I love it. This is probably my all-time favorite. I do this one and then Breaking Dawn, and the rest are just ordered however they're ordered. And that was my Twilight series. Moving on. So the book that I started the year with was by John Green, and I read another one by him later in the year. The first one that I read is probably one of my all-time favorite books ever. It is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. I've seen this movie at least 1,000 times. It's one of my favorite movies. I love it. It's like completely heart-wrenching in like the best way. And I finally wanted to read the book. And it did not disappoint. It's very, very similar to the movie. I don't think there's much that's like different. I don't think there's like anything at all that's different, honestly. Two cancer kids meet at like a group therapy, I guess. I don't really know. You go through this book where these two cancer kids like fall in love. I know this movie's been out for a really long time and the book's probably been out for longer, but I don't want to spoil it. This is one of my favorite reads, one of my favorite movies. I could reread it and rewatch it for the rest of my life. 5 out of 5 stars. I'm stingy with those, but this deserved it. These two made me believe in love and like what was the point? And I to this day don't think there's a better love story out there. No book I've ever read has made me like fall in love with a love story more than this book. Top notch. Read it. And then I read this one by John Green. It's Looking for Alaska. People told me that this book was really, really good. And like, I don't disagree. It had potential, but the ending just didn't do it for me. It's very open-ended, very uncertain. I just wasn't. I went the whole book like trying to figure out what happened and like what was going on, and like I didn't even get to know without spoiling anything. Like it doesn't even fully wrap up the story. Definitely not one of my favorites. Probably won't reread again. This guy named Miles goes to like this school, or maybe it's college, I don't know what it is, but he goes there and he meets all these people and he meets Alaska. And he basically like kind of forms a crush on her, but she has a boyfriend. That's about as much as I can give you. I'll rate it 2.5 out of 5 stars. And I actually like that quote. And I feel bad for giving this such low rating, but like it's not something that I'll read again. This is a book I read this year. And that's that. So moving on. Next up on my reading list is the 4-book series of The 100. This is a television show from the CW, I believe, that ended not too many years ago. The books are like completely different. It follows the same storyline at the beginning of the first one, but like from then on, the show and the books like completely change course. I prefer the books. First, we have just The 100. This entire series is written by Cass Morgan, basically following the end of the world. Like 100-something years later, there's 100 delinquents that get sent down to Earth to see if it is now inhabitable. And the entire 4-book series is basically them trying to survive. Finding out that Earth has been inhabited this entire time. There are other people here. They have to fend for themselves. Yeah, that's basically what it's about. So this is the first run, and then it's followed with The 100 Day 21. The 3rd book is called The 100 Homecoming. And the last and 4th is The 100 Rebellion. 3.5 out of 5 stars, just because I've read better, but I do love these books. Good books, overall. Kind of dystopian. Read them, don't read them, I guess. Alright, so next up we have just a couple random books that I read throughout the course of the first 6 months of this year. They are standalones, they're not series. Technically that's not totally true for 3 of them, but I don't have the series for 3 of them, and I haven't read the series for 3 of them. If that makes sense. I'll explain once we get to them. The first book I have is called The Beach House by Jenny Hale. I found this at Walmart and I bought it because I was going to the beach and I needed a good like beach read. The back actually sounded interesting and the book actually is really good. Definitely more of like a low-key kind of read. It's a slow-paced book. It's not like thrilling or like jaw-dropping or anything. After her grandmother's passing, Melanie, our main character, moves to somewhere that her and her grandmother frequented, and there's like this rundown old house that her grandmother left Melanie to like fix up and like live in and whatnot. There's a really good contractor in town. His name's Josh. Basically, he helps her renovate the house, even though he does not want to help her renovate the house because of who the house used to belong to. And who the house used to belong to also connects back to Melanie's grandmother. And there's a whole separate storyline there. So the book is her trying to fix up the house and figure out who this guy was. She finds some of his belongings. She finds some letters. She's trying to figure out the story there. So that's kind of interesting. I did kind of like that. A tad predictable though. 2.5 out of 5 stars. Not because it was bad, but again, because I've read better. Good for what it was, but not the first book I'd ever recommend to someone. Next up, we have a book that is technically part of a series. It is called Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. There are 2 books following this. What are their names? Second one is Things We Hide from the Light, and the third is Things We Left Behind. And I'm pretty sure each book is about different characters, but in the same universe. So this book is about Naomi and Knox. And the second book is like about Knox's brother and someone else. So same universe, but like different books. So that's why I call it a standalone. I read this one, haven't read I haven't read the second one, which name I've already forgotten. I do own it though. I really liked this book. It kind of reminded me of Colleen Hoover's Reminders of Him. Naomi comes to town. She has a twin sister. Her twin sister is like left town and asked Naomi to take care of her daughter, aka Naomi's niece, without detailing where she went and stealing some of Naomi's stuff. As she's trying to like just get used to life and like get her niece to like her, she meets Knox, who basically owns like a good portion of the town. Kind of bad boy, but he helps her get on her feet in like completely different worlds. She's a good girl, he's a bad guy. They fall in love, but don't admit that they've fallen in love, so they start like a friends with benefits kind of thing. That's basically what the book is. It's a good book. I'd give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I actually really liked it. I can't wait to read the second one. Good book. I recommend. So next is a book that is also technically part of a series. The second book hasn't been released yet. Not recently, it's been a couple months now. There is a show on Netflix called Outer Banks. Season 3 was released in February, I think. And right after it was released, I started watching it. Finished the show, all 3 seasons, in less than a week, because that's how good it is. And I was curious. I was like, are there any books about this show? And in fact, there are. It is called Outer Banks Lights Out. Mainly focuses on John B. and JJ and a female character who is not in the show. Her name is Savannah. She's a tourist. She's not from there. It takes place the spring break before the show starts. There's like a storm rolling in. John B's dad is missing. JJ and John B meet this kook, Toran. She has a boyfriend. They end up like getting lost out in the middle of the storm. They have to hide out at like this old creaky looking lighthouse type thing. JJ and Savannah have a thing, and there's also some like people there that may or may not want to kill them. I don't totally remember. 3 out of 5 stars. If you're a fan, definitely check this out. Definitely give it a read. Totally worth your time. Last but not least, this is my most recent read. Like, this is the book that I literally just finished, and it is called Hooked by Emily McIntyre. It is basically a modern day story of Peter Pan. There's a main character named Wendy, who is the daughter of Peter Michaels, who goes by Pan sometimes. There's also our main character, James, who goes by Hook. Not because he has one hand, but because he has a knife that's like in the shape of a hook. James is like super rich. He like runs the entire town that Wendy has just moved to. He hates Wendy's dad. Peter Michaels ruined James' life. And so in the beginning, James uses Wendy to try and get closer to Peter Michaels and closer to getting his revenge on him. And throughout the book, he develops feelings for her. It's a lot. It's a little spicy. It's a little gore-like. Definitely not a children's book like the original Peter Pan is, but I absolutely loved this book. Like 4 out of 5 stars for me, because it was everything and more. This was so worth my time, and this is also part of a series. I'm not sure what the other books are about because I don't own them, but there's 3 more books. Worth your time. Give it a read. Let's move on. Last but certainly not least, I have 3 more books to go over that I have read. All 3 are Colleen Hoover books. One of the books that I read in the last 6 months is called Layla by Colleen Hoover. I currently don't have the physical copy with me because I am letting my mother read it. It's a little bit of a supernatural book. I don't remember the characters' names. Hold on. So you have your 2 main characters, Layla and Leeds. They meet, I believe, at Layla's sister's wedding. Immediately, Leeds is taken by Layla. Basically, he falls in love with her. She falls in love with him. They start their life together. An unexpected incident happens to Layla. She has to like physically fight for her life, but after she's gotten out of the hospital, she's like a completely different person. So Leeds tries to take her back to the bed and breakfast where the wedding took place, where they first met, to try and get them to reconnect, to get her back to herself. While they're at this bed and breakfast, things start happening. Strange things, supernatural things. He meets someone called Willow at the B&B that they first met at, and he starts to form this connection with her. Basically, Leeds has to decide between Layla and Willow and who he's gonna help, because they both need his help, but he can't help both of them. That's all I'm gonna give you. It's a good read. I give it a 3.5 out of 5. Moving on to the last two books. We have two amazing books by Colleen Hoover. And I'm gonna do Ugly Love first. I recently read this book, and my sister spoke very highly of this book. She absolutely loves it. It's one of her top books by Colleen Hoover. Basically, we have our two main characters, Tate and Miles. This is all I can give you. The book basically follows sister and brother's best friend in a friends with benefits type situation, because Miles is physically not capable of falling in love with someone. He's completely cut himself off to falling in love. He hasn't been in a relationship for like 6 years. And you do flash back to 6 years ago to see what happened between him and the other chick that he was once with. Most of the first half of the book is like just Miles and Tate doing their thing behind her brother's back. Also flashing back to the past and learning some interesting things about Miles in his last relationship. I personally didn't get fully invested until like halfway through the book, toward the end, where Tate and Miles really want to be with each other, but again, Miles is physically not capable of being with her. Tate wants to know about Miles, but Miles had two rules: that she couldn't expect a future and she could not ask about the past. The more that Tate knows Miles, the longer that she knows him, the more she wants to know about his life. He has to go through a lot of obstacles before he can really open himself up to Tate. If he can even survive opening himself up to the past enough to be with her. It's a really good book. This is in my top 4 Colleen Hoover books because the ending is really unexpected. What happened in Miles' past is really unexpected. I did not see it coming. I love Miles Archer. He's one of my favorite Colleen Hoover men. Ranking wise of the Colleen Hoover books, number 1 is Verity. Number 2 I haven't gone over yet. Number 3 is November 9th. And number 4 is this book right here, Ugly Love. 4 out of 5. I love it. Definitely recommend. Give it a read. It's definitely worth your time. And last on the entire list is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. Did I wait a good while to read this book? Yes. Did I finish it in 3 days? Absolutely. This is my second favorite Colleen Hoover book. This was not what I was expecting at all. I had no, like, my mother had read this, she loved it. My sister had read this, she loved it. But this was not what I was expecting it to be about. You have 3 main characters, Lily, Ryle, and Atlas. Lily and Atlas met in high school and had a little romance going on, but they did part ways. You go through the book seeing her life with Atlas in the past and her life now with this guy named Ryle, who she just met. Ryle seems great. He's rich, for one, but Ryle doesn't turn out to be what we thought he was. And that's all I can tell you. I got told even less than that, and this is not what I was expecting. Atlas does reappear in the present of Lily's life, and it does cause some problems, but it also helps Lily out tremendously. And that's it. That's all I'm saying. Because you have to read the book to truly experience it. It's such a good book, and it's such a good story, and I am in love with it. It's definitely worth the read. It's definitely worth your time. 5 out of 5 stars. And I don't feel badly. So that is all of the books I have read in the first 6 months of 2023, from January to the end of June. I don't know what's up next on my TBR. There's a good few books that I want to try and get through in the next 6 months, and I think I am definitely capable. So fingers crossed. Good luck on your own reading journey. I hope I gave you some good reads. I hope I gave you some recommendations and something to go get your hands on. If you have read some of the books that I have read and think differently than what I did about the book, let me know. I'm genuinely always curious to see how different people can react to books. But that's all that I have for you. I have read no more books. Thanks for watching. If you made it all the way through the video, applause to you. I'll see you in 6 months for my next What I Read in 2023 video. Have a great day, guys. Goodbye.